This filthy thing is an eyesore, just like you!
That's what the HOA president screamed as she grabbed my fishing rod, snapped it over her knee, and threw both halves in the lake. I'd been 40 miles away on patrol. By the time my neighbor called and I drove home, 2 men she'd hired were already hauling my kayak off my own dock.
This is a lakefront community, not a campgrounds for drifters. You lower the value of everything you touch.
She slapped a clipboard against my chest.
$5,600? Or the kayak goes to the crusher?
That rod was my father's.
I said.
On my dock.
Sweetheart, every inch of this lake answers to me.
What she never thought to check was the badge in my truck, the kind that turns her little kingdom into a federal case. My name's Garrett Tanner, 44 years old, 18 years as a conservation agent for the Missouri Department of Conservation. That's the official title, but most folks just call us game wardens. I patrol 6 counties across the Ozarks: lakes, rivers, timber. I check fishing licenses, investigate poaching, and enforce wildlife law. I've tracked down a man who dynamited a trout stream at 2 in the morning, and I've arrested a county judge for spotlighting deer off a back road. My badge carries full law enforcement authority in the state of Missouri. I can write citations, make arrests, carry a firearm, and access any state or federal wildlife record in the system. Before all that, I was a Marine. 2 tours in Iraq. Came home with a back full of shrapnel and a deep appreciation for silence. The kind of silence you only get sitting on a dock at dawn, watching mist lift off the water while a bobber drifts and the world leaves you alone for an hour. That's what my father gave me. Clayton Tanner, postal worker for 31 years. Never made much money, never complained about it. Every Saturday from the time I was 7, he drove me 45 minutes south to Lake Shelby, a natural spring-fed lake tucked between oak ridges in the southern Ozarks, and we fished until the sun went down. Largemouth bass, channel catfish, bluegill the size of your hand. He taught me to tie a Palomar knot, to read water current, to sit still when every muscle wanted to move. Dad died 2 years ago. Lung cancer. Took him in 8 months. The last thing he said to me, sitting in a hospital bed that smelled like bleach and plastic tubing, was, "Buy that cabin, son. Fish our lake." So I did. Every dollar I'd saved, 20 years of government paychecks, no vacations, no new trucks, and I bought a 2-bedroom cedar cabin on Lot 17 at Lake Shelby Estates. 45 cabins in the community, mostly weekend getaways for families from Springfield and Branson. The cabin needed work. Roof leaked, porch sagged, the dock planks were soft in the middle, but the view was the same one I remembered from childhood. Mist on the water, oaks leaning over the bank, the smell of pine sap and wet limestone drifting through the screen door every morning. First 2 weeks, I kept to myself. Fixed the porch railing, replaced the hot water heater, pulled 18 years of dead leaves out of the gutters. Neighbors waved from their porches. Decent people. But something was off. Every time I mentioned the lake, people changed the subject. Quick smile, short answer, eyes somewhere else. Like I'd brought up someone's divorce at a barbecue. Week 2, I found out why. A white Cadillac Escalade pulled into my driveway at 9 in the morning. Out stepped Shelby Kincaid, HOA president of Lake Shelby Estates for 9 consecutive years. Blonde hair pulled into a helmet that probably cost more than my water heater. Linen blazer over yoga pants. Sunglasses that could double as a welding shield. She was carrying a 3-inch binder with color-coded tabs and a laminated cover that read, "Community Standards and Guidelines, Office of the Board President." She introduced herself as the soul of this community. Not paraphrasing, her exact words. She walked through my cabin like a health inspector with a grudge, counted my lawn chairs, photographed my trash cans, noted the color of my curtains. Then she sat on my porch, opened the binder to section 14C, acceptable dock colors, and told me that lake usage required an HOA fishing permit, $200 annually, approved by me personally. I asked if that was in the CC&Rs. She smiled the way a principal smiles at a child who asked a stupid question. "Honey, I am the CC&Rs." She left. I read the actual CC&Rs cover to cover, not a single word about fishing permits. 3 days later, I was sitting on my dock with a rod in one hand and a cold beer in the other. Shelby appeared with a $5,000 fine and a threat to lien my cabin for fishing at my own home. I sent Shelby a formal letter the next morning, certified mail, polite, precise, and organized the way 18 years of writing enforcement reports teaches you. I cited the CC and RS, Article 4 through Article 9, and noted that no provision existed for fishing permits, lake access fees, or fines for recreational waterway use. I requested a written response within 14 days, identifying the specific covenant, bylaw, or board resolution authorizing her fine. Kept a copy for myself. Her response arrived 6 days later. Not a letter. Another violation notice. Same letterhead, same fake official formatting, same tone of manufactured authority. This one added a second charge: failure to comply with board directive. The fine was now $5,200. She'd tacked on $200 for the fishing permit I still hadn't bought. The notice had no case number, no CC and RS reference, no board vote date, no signature from anyone other than Shelby herself. It read like a parking ticket written by a woman who'd watched too many courtroom dramas and decided she was the judge, jury, and meter maid. I called the HOA management company listed on the community website. The number rang to a disconnected line. I tried the backup number. Same thing. I drove to the address listed on the annual disclosure form. A strip mall office near Branson. The suite was empty. Had been for 3 years, according to the nail salon next door. There was no management company. Shelby ran everything. Every fine, every rule, every dollar. All flowing through a P.O. box registered to Shelby Kincaid. That evening, I sat on Wade Parrish's screened porch, drinking black coffee from a tin camp mug that had more dents than my first truck. Wade was 60-something, retired electrician, lived 4 cabins down. Quiet man, big hands, the kind of guy who fixes things without talking about it. How long has she been doing this? I asked. Wade set his mug on the railing and looked at the lake like he was checking whether it could hear us. 9 years, maybe longer. She fined me $300 last spring because my kayak was the wrong shade of green. Said it clashed with the visual palette of the waterfront. Her words. Did you pay? Everybody pays, Garrett. Know why? Her husband is Dwayne Kincaid, County Planning Commissioner. You fight Shelby, you get a visit from code enforcement. You appeal a fine, your dock permit gets delayed. You complain at a meeting, your septic inspection is suddenly 6 months overdue. He took a long sip. She's not just the HOA president, she's the toll booth, and Dwayne is the road. Wade went inside and came back with a shoebox. Inside, 11 violation notices spanning 4 years. Wrong kayak color, unapproved wind chimes, a garden flag that was 2 inches above the maximum display height. One citation was for having a porch light that was excessively warm in color temperature. I'm not making that up. She wrote a man up for having a yellow porch light. The violation notice cited Section 9F, Exterior Illumination Standards, a section that does not exist in the CC and Rs. I checked. Not one of those notices cited a real provision. Not one had a board vote number. Not one had been reviewed by any human other than Shelby Kincaid. Here's what most people don't know about HOA fines in Missouri. An HOA can only levy a fine if the violation is clearly defined in the recorded CC and RS. The fine schedule has been adopted by a proper board vote, and the homeowner receives notice and an opportunity to be heard. A fine invented by one person with no bylaw support and no due process isn't just unenforceable, it's potentially fraudulent. You can challenge it in court, and in most cases, you'll win. The problem is, most people don't know that, and Shelby had been counting on their ignorance for nearly a decade. I drove home that night with Wade's shoebox on my passenger seat and a feeling in my gut I hadn't felt since Iraq. Not anger exactly, something colder. The quiet certainty that something deeply wrong had been running unchecked for years because the people in charge were the ones doing it. I wasn't angry yet, but I was paying very close attention. The next Saturday I got up at 5, grabbed my rod, and walked down to the community boat ramp at the south end of the lake. It was the only shared access point in the neighborhood, a concrete slab with a chain-link gate that had been open every day since I moved in. It wasn't open anymore. Somebody had wrapped a brand new chain through the gate posts and locked it with a padlock the size of a fist. Hanging from the chain was a laminated sign, because of course it was laminated, printed in bold red letters. Lake Access Restricted, HOA. Members with active fishing permits only, by order of the board president. By order of the board president. Not the board, not a vote, not a bylaw, the board president. Shelby had appointed herself harbor master of a 40-acre lake in the Ozarks and locked the gate like she was closing the port of New York. The sign had the same font and formatting as a royal proclamation. All it was missing was a wax seal and a signature in quill pen. I stood there in the pre-dawn fog, the smell of wet limestone and pine bark drifting off the water, and I almost laughed. Almost. Then I noticed the fine print at the bottom. Violators will be subject to immediate towing of watercraft and a minimum fine of $1,000. She wasn't just restricting access, she was monetizing it. Every locked gate was a cash register. Every laminated sign was a price tag dressed up as governance. I drove home, opened my laptop, and started pulling records. Not as a homeowner yet, not as a game warden yet, just as a man who knows how to read a government database. Lake Shelby sits on 42 acres in Taney County, Missouri. It connects to a spring-fed creek that empties into Table Rock Lake, a navigable waterway under federal jurisdiction. Under Missouri law, any natural lake over 10 acres with a connection to a public water supply or navigable waterway carries public access rights. A private HOA cannot restrict access to a state-managed body of water. Not with a chain, not with a padlock, not with a laminated sign, period. But it got better. I pulled the Missouri Department of Conservation fish stocking schedule. Lake Shelby had been receiving annual stock from the state for 15 years. Largemouth bass, channel catfish, and hybrid bluegill, all placed by conservation agents using state funds and state trucks. The state of Missouri had been actively managing this lake's fish population since 2011. Restricting fishing on a state-managed waterway isn't a HOA overreach. It's a state conservation violation. It's like locking the door to a public library and charging $5 to read. I filed a formal complaint with the Missouri Department of Natural Resources that afternoon. 3 pages, factual and clean, with photos of the chain, the sign, and the stocking records attached. DNR acknowledged receipt within 48 hours. That same week, Connie Delacroix knocked on my door, mid-50s, night shift ER nurse at Mercy Hospital in Springfield. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week, which, knowing ER nurses, she probably hadn't. She lived 2 lots over and had the best garden in the neighborhood. Tomatoes, herbs, sunflowers, a bird bath shaped like a stone angel. She fined me $800, Connie said, standing on my porch with her arms wrapped tight like she was cold, even though it was July. For a bird feeder, said it was an unapproved wildlife attractant and a visual disruption to the community aesthetic. I let that phrase hang. Unapproved wildlife attractant. The woman was fining a nurse $800 for feeding sparrows. When I told her I wasn't paying, Connie said, she smiled at me. That smile. And she said, "I'd hate for your driveway permit to get reconsidered. Dwayne handles those, you know." There it was again. Dwayne, the husband, the county planning commissioner. Every time someone pushed back on Shelby, Dwayne materialized like a bureaucratic ghost. Permits delayed, inspections invented, variance applications lost. He wasn't just her husband, he was her enforcement arm. She wrote the fines. He made sure nobody survived the appeal. Connie left with a promise to send me copies. I sat on my porch and watched the sun drop behind the oaks. The cicadas were screaming. The air smelled like warm pine and cut grass. Somewhere on the water, a bass jumped. A good one, by the sound of the splash. Nobody was allowed to catch it. Not without Shelby's permission. Not without paying Shelby's toll. I opened my laptop and started a new folder. I named it Kincaid. I came home from a 12-hour patrol shift on a Thursday evening. 6 counties, 2 poaching reports, 1 warning issued to a bass tournament that forgot its permit. and pulled into my gravel driveway to find my dock empty. Not empty as in nobody was sitting on it. Empty as in my kayak was gone. The green Old Town vapor I'd had since my 20s. The one I paddled out to the deep spots at dawn when the bass were feeding shallow. The one my daughter Lily sat in the front of last summer, squealing every time a wave rocked us sideways. Gone. I walked the bank, checked the tree line. Nothing. Called Wade. Saw it this morning, Wade said. About 8:30. 2 guys in a white pickup backed a trailer down to your dock and loaded it up. Shelby was standing on the road giving directions. Directions. Garrett, she was pointing like a traffic cop at a parade. Full arm extension. I think she was wearing the blazer. I called Shelby. She picked up on the second ring like she'd been waiting for it. The way a spider waits for a thread to vibrate. Your watercraft was in violation of the community aesthetic guidelines for lakefront properties, she said. Specifically, the color and vessel profile did not conform to the approved visual standards. It has been removed and placed in secure HOA storage. Where is it? You may retrieve it once your account is current. That's the $5,000 fine, the $200 annual permit, and a $400 retrieval fee. You took my property off my private dock. I enforce the community guidelines, Mr. Tanner. That's my job. If you have a problem with it, you're welcome to address the board at next month's meeting. $5,600 to get back a kayak that was parked on my own dock. On my own property. In a lake the state of Missouri managed with taxpayer money. The audacity wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how rehearsed she sounded, how practiced, like she'd made this exact call a dozen times before, and every single time, the other person eventually wrote a check. I went to the meeting. Lake Shelby Estates Community Room, a cinder block building behind the mailbox cluster that smelled like old carpet and the ghost of every potluck casserole since 2008. Folding tables, plastic chairs, fluorescent lights that buzzed like a dental office. And at the front, on a table exactly 4 inches higher than everything else, I measured later because it nagged me, sat Shelby Kincaid. Brass nameplate, personal microphone, and a mahogany gavel, an actual gavel. For a 45-cabin HOA meeting in a room with no air conditioning. She ran that meeting like the Senate Judiciary Committee. Every item was a motion. Every vote required all in favor, delivered in a tone that suggested constitutional ratification. She referred to herself in the third person, twice. The chair recognizes the chair. She was the chair. I stood up during open comment. I'd like to address the board regarding the removal of my personal watercraft from my private dock. Shelby didn't look up. She tapped the gavel once, a sharp crack that bounced off the cinder blocks, and said, "The member at Lot 17 is not in good standing. Accounts with outstanding balances are not permitted to address the board. Please sit down. I have a legal right to." Motion to remove the non-compliant member from the floor. All in favor? 4 hands went up. 4 board members sitting in a row behind the elevated table, like jurors who'd been told the verdict before the trial. Motion carries. Please exit, Mr. Tanner. I walked out into the parking lot, gravel crunching under my boots, pine trees black against a purple sky, yellow light spilling from the meeting room window across the pavement. Hank Jessup was leaning against his truck, arms crossed. 72 years old, retired postal worker, lived at Lake Shelby longer than anyone. He looked at me with eyes that had watched this exact scene before. "She's been doing this since 2015, he said quietly. "Nobody's ever beaten her. Her husband makes sure of that." I looked at the lake. The moon was sitting on the water. The dock where I used to sit with my dad was out there, empty. No kayak, no chair, no rod holder. Just boards and silence. I didn't decide to fight her for the kayak, or for the $5,000, or for the cabin. I decided to fight because for 9 years she'd made decent people afraid to live in their own homes. And my father didn't leave me that lake so I could watch someone lock it up and sell the keys. I drove home, opened my laptop, logged into the Missouri Conservation Agent database, not as a neighbor, as a state game warden. Badge number 4471. Time to find out exactly what Shelby Kincaid had been doing with that lake. The state database opened up the whole picture in about 48 hours. First, the fish stocking ledger. Missouri Conservation had stocked Lake Shelby with largemouth bass, channel catfish, and hybrid bluegill every spring since 2011. State trucks, state biologists, state funds. The lake was part of a regional fishery management program for natural spring-fed lakes across the Ozarks. Lake Shelby wasn't just a community pond, it was a state-managed body of water. Restricting fishing access wasn't a policy question, it was a state wildlife violation. Second, the water connection. Lake Shelby's outflow fed Cedar Creek, which flows into Table Rock Lake, one of the most regulated navigable waterways in Missouri. Under state law, a lake with a connection to a navigable waterway carries public access protections. No private entity, not a developer, not a homeowner, and absolutely not an HOA president with a laminated sign, can legally block access to a waterway in the state management system. Shelby hadn't just made up a fishing permit. She'd committed a state conservation violation every single day that chain hung on the gate. Third, and this is where I stopped typing and stared at the screen, I pulled the HOA financial disclosures from the county recorder's office. Missouri requires associations with more than 20 members to file annual financial summaries. Lake Shelby Estates had 45 homeowners. The disclosures listed standard income, annual dues, special assessments, maintenance reserves. Nowhere, not on a single page across 9 years of filings, did the words lake maintenance fee appear. But Shelby had been charging one. $200 per household per year. 45 households. 9 years. That's $81,000, collected personally, deposited into a P.O. box registered in her name. Not 1 cent recorded in the HOA's official books, not 1 cent disclosed in any annual filing. $81,000, swallowed by the woman who fined me $5,000 for fishing. I sat back in my chair. The laptop glowed blue in the dark cabin. Outside, the frogs were in full chorus along the bank. And across the water, a screech owl let out a cry that sounded like a question nobody wanted answered. But I wasn't finished, because the fourth thing I found was worse than embezzlement. I pulled zoning records from Dwayne Kincaid's own office, the County Planning Commission. 6 months earlier, Dwayne had personally signed a zoning variance for a developer named Todd Renfro. The variance authorized commercial marina construction on 3 acres of lakefront property at the northeast corner of the lake. Boat slips, a fuel dock, a retail storefront, a full commercial operation, on land protected by a federal conservation easement. Conservation easements are not suggestions. When land is placed under a federal conservation easement, it is legally protected from development, permanently. Any change in use requires approval from both the state conservation agency and the federal oversight body. A county planning commissioner cannot approve development on conservation land by himself. Dwayne hadn't bent a rule. He'd broken federal law. And the woman who'd crowned herself guardian of the lake was married to the man who was selling it to a developer. She fined me $5,000 for fishing. Meanwhile, she and her husband were stealing $81,000 from their neighbors and greenlighting the destruction of protected land for profit. I picked up my phone and called FBI agent Colleen Brewer at the Springfield field office. She answered on the 3rd ring. I told her what I had. She was very interested. Over the next 3 weeks, I built the case the way I build every case. Quietly, methodically, and with enough paper to bury someone who deserves burying. First call, Missouri Conservation Commission. I filed a formal enforcement complaint detailing the illegal restriction of a state-managed waterway. Attach the fish stocking records, photos of the locked gate and the laminated sign, and a copy of Shelby's fictional fishing permit requirement. The commission assigned an investigator within a week. They were not amused. When you spend 15 years stocking a lake with taxpayer-funded fish, and some woman chains the gate shut and charges admission, the Conservation Commission takes it personally. Second call, FBI agent Colleen Brewer. I sent her everything on the conservation easement fraud. Dwayne's signed zoning variance, Todd Renfro's development application, and the original easement filing showing the land was permanently protected under federal law. Brewer opened a formal case. Conservation easement fraud is a federal felony. Not a fine, not a slap. The The kind of charge that ends careers and starts prison terms. Dwayne had signed his name to a document authorizing the destruction of federally protected land. He might as well have autographed a confession. Third call, Missouri Attorney General's Office. I reported the misappropriation of HOA funds, $81,000 in unrecorded lake maintenance fees collected over 9 years, deposited into a private P.O. box with no accounting, no board vote, and no disclosure. The AG's Consumer Protection Division handles HOA fraud. They opened a file. While the government machinery cranked forward, I worked the neighborhood. Wade Parrish was first. He gave me every violation notice, every receipt, every canceled check he'd written to Shelby's P.O. box over 4 years. He also handed me something I didn't expect, a spreadsheet. Wade had been quietly tracking every fine Shelby issued to every homeowner he knew about. 47 fines in 9 years. Only 3 had any CC and RS basis. The rest were invented. Dock colors, kayak shades, wind chime frequencies, garden flag heights, porch light color temperatures. He'd built the spreadsheet the way a retired electrician builds anything. Neat, thorough, and wired correctly. Connie Delacroix gave me her violation notices and a written statement about the driveway permit threat. She connected me to 2 other homeowners, Genevieve Alcott, a retired teacher fined for a decorative wind spinner, and the Prestons, a young couple who nearly lost their cabin after Dwayne delayed their building permit for 6 months over a dispute about pool chemicals. Hank Jessup was last to commit and hardest to convince. He sat on his porch for a long time, watching the lake, before he said anything. 3 families left, he said quietly. The Bowmans, the Claibornes, the Fentons, all of them sold below market because Shelby harassed them out, and Dwayne blocked their improvements. Know who bought 2 of those cabins? Shelby's college friend from Joplin. 30 cents on the dollar. That sounds like real estate manipulation, Hank. That sounds like what it was. He gave me his statement. And he gave me the 3rd buyer's name, Todd Renfro, the same developer behind the marina. Renfro bought the Fenton cabin at a distressed price on land adjacent to the planned marina site. The whole scheme was connected. Harassment, intimidation, below-market buyouts, and a commercial development on conservation land. All of it running through the Kincaid household like sewage through a pipe. Now the trap. I installed trail cameras on my dock and at the community boat ramp, legal under my game warden authority and my property rights. Filed a FOIA request for all communications between Dwayne Kincaid and Todd Renfro related to the zoning variance. The county had 30 days to respond, and I planned the meeting. The Lake Shelby Estates annual meeting was set for the 2nd Thursday of August. Every homeowner attended. Shelby used it as her coronation. Annual report, budget rubber stamp, board re-election, unopposed naturally, and whatever new restrictions she'd invented during the year. This year, she was getting a different kind of agenda. I coordinated with Agent Brewer. FBI would have 2 agents in the room, plain clothes, unannounced, ready. Missouri Conservation would send an officer. The plan: let Shelby open the meeting, let her do her thing, let her stand behind her brass nameplate with her mahogany gavel and her laminated agenda. Let her feel untouchable. Then show her what a real badge looks like. I printed 45 evidence packets, 1 per homeowner. Financial records, stocking schedules, zoning documents, fine histories. The printer ran until 4 in the morning. The cabin smelled like warm toner and fresh ink. Somewhere in there I heard Shelby had ordered a new gavel from Amazon. Mahogany, $47, engraved SK, same-day delivery. She was preparing to run the meeting like a queen. I was preparing to end her reign. 3 weeks before the annual meeting, Shelby got nervous. I don't know exactly who tipped her off. Small community, 45 cabins, secrets travel at the speed of gossip. But something shifted. Her Escalade started cruising past my cabin twice a day instead of once a week. She stopped waving. Her face through the tinted windshield had a new expression. Not anger, not panic. Calculation. She struck on a Tuesday morning while I was out on patrol. I got home at 5:30 to find my dock destroyed. 2 tons of gravel and crushed limestone piled across the boards, spilling into the water on both sides like an avalanche that took a wrong turn. The cedar planks, the same ones I'd reinforced by hand the week I moved in, the same planks my father and I sat on 37 years ago, were cracked down the center, split clean through. The dock railing had collapsed. One support post had snapped at the base and was leaning into the lake at an angle that looked like surrender. The gravel was still warm from the afternoon sun. It smelled like dust and pulverized rock, and the metallic tang of fresh-cut limestone. I stood there in my uniform, hands at my sides, and just looked at it for a long time. A note was stapled to the one post still standing. Emergency erosion repair, authorized by the board president per Maintenance Directive 2024-09. No homeowner action required. Emergency erosion repair. On my private dock, with 2 tons of gravel. The woman had fabricated a maintenance directive, hired someone to dump a truckload of rock on my property, destroyed the dock where my father taught me to fish, and called it erosion control. It was like calling arson a heating solution. I didn't yell, didn't kick anything. I pulled out my phone and photographed every angle. The gravel pile, the cracked planks, the collapsed railing, the note, the tire tracks in the mud where the dump truck backed down to the water. Then I checked the trail camera. Beautiful footage, crystal clear. Shelby's white Escalade pulling up at 10:14 a.m. 2 men in a blue dump truck, no company markings, backing down the slope. Shelby standing on the bank in her linen blazer, pointing at my dock with one arm extended like a general ordering artillery fire, clipboard in her other hand. The gravel cascading off the truck bed, the sound of cedar cracking, the men leaving. Shelby walking back to her Escalade without once looking up to check for cameras. 9 years of absolute power had made her careless, the way it always does. She couldn't imagine anyone was watching back. Destruction of private property, criminal trespass, vandalism, all on high-definition video. I added the footage to the evidence file and kept my mouth shut. 1 week later, Dwayne played his card. A code enforcement inspector named Tyler, 28 years old, fresh out of whatever program produces county inspectors, showed up at my cabin with a clipboard and a tape measure, and the body language of a man who desperately wanted to be somewhere else. He introduced himself, avoided eye contact, and explained he was conducting a routine compliance inspection. Routine, I said. Yes, sir. On a cabin that passed full inspection 3 months ago when I purchased it. Tyler swallowed. I'm following up on concerns that were flagged. He measured the distance from my dock supports to the property line. He measured the height of my storage shed. He measured the setback of my septic tank. He measured everything twice because his hands were trembling and he kept reading the tape differently. I stood 5 feet away in my conservation agent uniform, which I happened to be wearing because I just finished a shift, and watched a man with 3 months of experience try to manufacture violations on a property that didn't have any. When he finished, I said, "Mind telling me who flagged these concerns?" Tyler looked at his clipboard, looked at me, looked at his clipboard again. "I'd rather not say, sir." "Was it the county planning commissioner?" Tyler didn't answer. His face did the answering for him. I called the county building department the next morning, spoke to the chief inspector directly, asked whether any formal complaint had been filed against my property. He checked the system. Nothing on file. No complaint. No inspection request. The visit had been, his exact word, informal. Informal inspections ordered by county officials targeting specific homeowners, I said. That sounds like retaliation. Long pause. "I'll make a note of your concern, Mr. Tanner." I made my own note. Under Section 1983 of the Civil Rights Act, a government official who uses his office to retaliate against a private citizen for exercising a legal right can be held personally liable. Not his department, not his county. Him. Dwayne had just handed me another count for the file. Trail camera footage. Gravel. Fake maintenance directive. Retaliatory inspection. I printed it all and added it to the evidence packets. 45 copies. The printer ran all night again. At this point, I owed that printer a medal. 2 weeks before the annual meeting, Shelby went nuclear. Every mailbox in Lake Shelby Estates received a letter. Not a violation notice this time. A safety alert. Printed on red-bordered paper, bold font, all-caps header. Urgent community safety notice. Lake Shelby Estates Board of Directors. It read like an FBI Most Wanted poster written by a woman whose most dangerous encounter was being out of oat milk at Starbucks. It described, without naming me directly, though the occupant of Lot 17 appeared 3 times, a community member engaged in threatening behavior, unauthorized surveillance activities, and repeated confrontations with HOA leadership. It urged residents to exercise caution and to report suspicious activity to the board president immediately. Unauthorized surveillance, threatening behavior. The woman who destroyed my dock, stole my kayak, embezzled $81,000, and locked the entire community out of their own lake was telling my neighbors I was the threat. The irony was so thick you could have spread it on toast. She posted the same language on the Lake Shelby Estates private Facebook group, added a personal touch. I don't want to alarm anyone, but please be careful around Lot 17. I've reported the situation to the sheriff's office, and I'm monitoring it closely. Your safety is my top priority. Your safety is my top priority. From the woman who charged a nurse $800 for a bird feeder and ran 3 families out of their homes so her friend could buy their cabins at foreclosure prices. She didn't prioritize safety. She prioritized control. And when control started slipping, she reached for the only weapon she had left: fear. Wade called me that evening. She's scared, he said. I've never seen her do this before. The letters, the Facebook post. She's trying to turn the neighborhood against you before you turn them against her.
Is it working?
Some people believe everything she prints on red paper, but more of them are starting to wonder. Genevieve Alcott called me today, asked what's really going on. I told Wade to sit tight. 2 more weeks. The sheriff's visit came 3 days later. Deputy Kyle Osterhaus, mid-30s, buzz cut, the polite but cautious manner of a man who handles domestic calls for a living, pulled into my driveway at 4 in the afternoon. He stepped out of the cruiser with his hand near his belt, not on it. Professional, measured. Mr. Tanner? Deputy Osterhaus, Taney County Sheriff's Office. We received a complaint from a Mrs. Kincaid regarding alleged harassment and trespassing. Mind if I ask a few questions? Come on up, I said. I was sitting on the porch, boots off, coffee in hand. The exact picture of a man who was not harassing anyone. I showed him my badge before he got through his first question. He stared at it for about 5 seconds. Missouri State Conservation Agent. Full peace officer authority. The same badge authority as any law enforcement officer in the state. I had no idea, sir, he said. His whole posture shifted. Not deference. Professional recognition. One badge respecting another. I gave him the short version. Fake fines. Embezzlement. Locked waterway, conservation fraud, dock destroyed on camera, retaliatory inspection. I didn't show evidence, that was for the meeting, but I sketched enough of the picture for him to understand the landscape. We get calls from Mrs. Kincaid, Deputy Osterhaus said carefully. Frequently. How frequently? Frequently enough that dispatch recognizes the number before it finishes ringing. He left with a handshake and a look that said the sheriff's department was done being Shelby Kincaid's personal complaint service. I learned later he briefed the sheriff directly. The sheriff, who'd known Dwayne for years and did not enjoy being weaponized in a neighborhood grudge match, made his own notes. The night before the annual meeting, I drove to Hank Jessup's cabin. He was sitting on his porch in the dark, a glass of bourbon on the railing, the lake silver under the moon. Hank, you ready for tomorrow? He didn't look at me for a long time. When he did, his eyes were wet. My wife loved this lake, he said. Eleanor. She died 2 years ago. Her heart. She used to sit right here every evening and watch the sun drop behind those oaks. The month after the funeral, the month, Garrett, Shelby raised our dues. 200 extra for infrastructure improvements. I never saw a single improvement. Just watched my savings shrink and my wife's lake get locked behind a chain. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. I'm 72 years old. I've been afraid of that woman for 9 years. Afraid to fish in my own lake. You won't be afraid after tomorrow, Hank. He looked at me. Then he nodded. Once. Slow and steady. The way a man nods when he's finally done being afraid. I drove home, checked the packets. 45 copies stacked on my kitchen table in neat rows. Badge in my pocket. Camera footage backed up twice. Tomorrow was the annual meeting. Shelby Kincaid had no idea who was coming to it. The Lake Shelby Estates annual meeting. Second Thursday of August, 7 o'clock. Community room behind the mailbox cluster. I arrived at 6:45. The room was already half full. More people than any meeting since I'd moved in. Word travels in a small community, and whatever word had traveled was enough to draw 43 of the 45 homeowners out of their cabins on a weeknight. Folding chairs in rows, fluorescent tubes humming overhead like nervous witnesses. The carpet smelled like it had been absorbing casserole grease and resentment for 2 decades. At the front of the room, the table, elevated 4 inches above everything else. Brass nameplate, Shelby Kincaid, board president, personal microphone, bottled water with a small HOA logo sticker she'd obviously printed on her home inkjet, and the gavel, the mahogany gavel, Amazon, $47, engraved SK, resting on its own little felt pad like the scepter of a very small, very angry kingdom. Shelby was in full regalia, cream blazer, gold earrings, hair freshly armored. She had a laminated agenda, laminated, presumably in case someone spilled accountability on it. And she opened the meeting exactly how she opened every meeting. I call this meeting to order. The chair recognizes the agenda before us. The chair. She called herself the chair, the way other people say, Your Honor. First 10 minutes were standard. Budget summary read at a speed designed to prevent comprehension. Maintenance report that was really just a list of things she'd complained about. Board re-election. Unopposed, because challenging Shelby was about as appealing as wrestling a porcupine in a phone booth. Then she reached the real reason she'd called everyone together. New business, she announced, tapping the gavel once. Motion to increase the penalty for Lot 17's outstanding violations to $10,000 and to initiate formal lien proceedings against the property. Murmurs, shifting chairs. I was sitting in the back row, jeans, flannel shirt, nothing official, nothing that said law enforcement. I stood up. Sit down, Mr. Tanner. You are not in good standing and you are not permitted to. Ma'am, I said. I'm not here as a homeowner tonight. The room went quiet. Not conversational quiet. The kind of quiet where you hear the fluorescent lights ticking and someone's chair leg scrape the floor 3 rows away. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out my badge, held it up so every person in the room could see it. My name is Garrett Tanner. I'm a conservation agent with the Missouri Department of Conservation. Badge number 4471. I carry full law enforcement authority in the state of Missouri. Shelby's mouth opened. Nothing came out. For the first time in 9 years, the chair had nothing to say. I walked to the front of the room, placed an evidence packet on the first chair. Wade started passing them back, hand to hand, row by row. What you're holding, I said, is a summary of 9 years of fraud, theft, and illegal activity conducted by your board president and her husband, County Planning Commissioner Dwayne Kincaid. I laid it out. Calm. Factual. Point by point. Lake Shelby is a state-managed waterway. The state has stocked it with fish for 15 years. Restricting access violates Missouri conservation law. The HOA fishing permit does not exist in your CC and Rs. It was invented by Shelby Kincaid and enforced with threats. The lake maintenance fee, $200 per household per year, $81,000 total, was collected by Shelby personally, deposited into a private P.O. box, and never once recorded in any HOA financial disclosure. That's embezzlement. The conservation easement. 3 acres of federally protected lakefront approved for commercial marina development by Dwayne Kincaid without state or federal authorization. A federal crime. People were reading the packets now, turning pages. I could hear the paper rustling like leaves before a storm. Shelby's face went through 3 colors in about 10 seconds. Red, white, then a grayish green I'd previously only seen on people sitting across from me in interrogation rooms. This is slander, she started. I will sue every last... The side door opened. FBI agent Colleen Brewer walked in. Dark suit, badge on her hip. A second agent behind her. Behind them both, a Missouri conservation officer in a green uniform and a flat-brimmed hat. Dwayne Kincaid? Agent Brewer said. Her voice carried like it was built for courtrooms and moments exactly like this one. Dwayne was in the front row. He stood up the way a man stands when his knees have already made the decision to quit. FBI, you're under arrest for violation of the Federal Conservation Easement Act and conspiracy to commit permit fraud. Place your hands behind your back, please. The handcuffs clicked. Sharp, metallic. The sound cut the silence like a bell in an empty church. The conservation officer stepped to Shelby, read her Miranda rights in a voice as flat and steady as a metronome. Embezzlement of HOA funds, illegal restriction of a state-managed waterway, filing false police reports, destruction of private property. Shelby didn't speak. For the first time in 9 years, the woman who had something to say about everyone's dock color, porch light, kayak shade, bird feeder, wind chime, and garden flag had absolutely nothing to say at all. I looked at her one last time. You fined me $5,000 for fishing at my own cabin, I said. But the real crime was never the fishing. Wade started clapping. Then Connie. Then Hank. 72 years old, tears on his cheeks, clapping like a man who'd been holding his breath for 9 years and finally let it out. Then the whole room. The last item on Shelby's laminated agenda, I checked later because I couldn't help myself, was new business. Community Appreciation Award for Board President, self-nominated. She never got to that item. Dwayne Kincaid was charged with federal conservation easement fraud, conspiracy, and abuse of office. His attorney tried to negotiate. The FBI wasn't in a negotiating mood. Federal judges don't look kindly on county officials who sell protected land to developers and weaponize their office against the people who notice. Dwayne was facing 5 to 10 years. Shelby was charged with embezzlement of HOA funds, filing false police reports, illegal restriction of a state-managed waterway, vandalism, and destruction of private property. Her third attorney, the first two reviewed the evidence and politely declined to continue, negotiated a plea that included full restitution, 3 years of probation, and a permanent ban from serving on any HOA board in Missouri. The court ordered her to repay every cent of the $81,000. Todd Renfro, the developer, caught conspiracy and permit fraud charges. The marina project died on the table. The conservation easement was reaffirmed by the Federal Oversight Agency. Those 3 acres of lakefront would stay exactly what they were supposed to be: trees, water, and wildlife. No boat slips, no fuel docks, no retail storefronts, just nature, doing what nature does when you stop trying to sell it. Restitution checks went out within 90 days. 45 households got their money back. Families Shelby had fined for imaginary violations received additional damages. The Prestons, the young couple Dwayne had squeezed on the building permit, got a separate settlement from the county. Genevieve Alcott, the retired teacher, had her windspinner fine refunded with interest and a handwritten apology from the new board president. And there was a new board. Real elections, open nominations, third-party management company, meeting minutes published within 72 hours, no brass nameplates, no personal microphones, no elevated table. There was, however, a gavel. Shelby's mahogany gavel was recovered from the evidence room after sentencing. The new board voted unanimously to repurpose it. It sits by the front door of the community room now. It's a doorstop. Best $47 Shelby ever spent. The chain came off the boat ramp the day Shelby was arrested. Wade cut it himself with bolt cutters he'd been keeping in his garage for exactly this moment. He told me later he bought them the day after she first locked the gate. Knew somebody would eventually need them, he said. Just didn't think it'd take this long. I got my kayak back. Found it in Shelby's storage unit, which was really just a shed behind her cabin packed with confiscated property from years of manufactured violations. 3 kayaks, 2 canoes, a paddleboard, solar string lights, and a ceramic garden gnome that had apparently violated Section 22B, unapproved ornamental figures. I loaded everything into Wade's truck and spent the afternoon driving the neighborhood, returning stolen belongings to people who'd given up hope of ever seeing them again. I rebuilt the dock myself. Cedar planks, hand-cut from a storm-felled tree on the back edge of my property. Sanded every board, drilled every bolt. Took 2 weekends and 1 perfect Sunday when the air smelled like fresh sawdust and lake water, and the cicadas hummed so loud they drowned out my drill. That fall, I established the Lake Shelby Conservation Fund. Free fishing clinics for kids every summer. Rods, reels, bait, and instruction. All donated or funded by the community. First class had 14 kids sitting on the community dock, lines in the water, learning Palomar knots and patience. One of them was Lily, my daughter, 12 years old and exactly as stubborn about catching fish as I was at her age. She hooked her first largemouth bass off the new dock on a Saturday morning in October. Pulled it up screaming and laughing, rod bent double, water spraying off the line in the early light. I took a photo, framed it, set it on the mantel next to the picture of my father holding the same kind of fish, in the same lake, 40 years earlier. That evening, I sat on the dock alone, sun dropping behind the oaks, water turning gold, then copper, then dark. A bass jumped somewhere near the far bank. Frogs started up. The air smelled like pine and wet stone, and something I hadn't felt since the day I signed the deed. Home. Dad would have sat right here, said nothing for an hour, then smiled. I smiled for him. If you've ever dealt with an HOA that treated power like a toy and neighbors like obstacles, I want to hear your story. Drop it in the comments. And if you want to see what happens when a contractor builds an HOA president a swimming pool and finds out she never planned to pay, make sure you're subscribed. That one's coming next week.
So let's talk about what really happened here. Shelby Kincaid didn't lose because she was mean. Plenty of mean people get away with it for years. She lost because she picked the wrong target and assumed he'd fall the way everyone else had. Garrett didn't yell, he didn't threaten, he didn't storm into a meeting and flip the table. He did what 18 years of law enforcement taught him to do. He documented everything, pulled the right record, contacted the right agencies, and built a case so clean that 3 separate government bodies showed up on the same night to shut her down. That's the lesson. You don't beat a bully by being louder. You beat a bully by being more prepared. Know your right, read your CC and IRS. Understand that HOA fine without bylaw support are paper tiger. And if someone in your position of power is stealing from your community, there are people whose literal job is to stop them. If you ever live under an HOA president who confused authority with ownership, I want to hear about it. Put your story in the comments. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Because next week, a constructor built an HOA president a custom pool and discovered she never had any